Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on ChasingCinema.com's official podcast. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to you and your family. We know you guys are opening gifts and doing whatever you do on this holiday. Hopefully you're at the movie theaters when this is being released. But we know when you get home, hopefully you have subscribed to the ChasingCinema.com show on iTunes, and it is automatically coming to your iPod, iPhone, whatever you're listening to us on every week. If not, you could find it on the YouTube channel, ChasingCinema.com. Or youtube.com/chasingcinema. Today, I have not one, but two guests for you. This is my Christmas present to you. Joining us again, we have, from the Guardian Liberty Voice, we have Michael Smith joining us. Sir, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me back.
And all of you have been getting quite familiar with Michael, as he's been a reoccurring guest for the past month or so. And then another great guest we've had reoccurring on, from the Las Vegas Stick, we have Josh Bell. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, sir, for joining us at our for the end of the year podcast. As we're going to be going into the new year, starting all sorts of fresh, and we're planning on having both of these gentlemen back to talk about our top 10 lists and favorite movies of the year eventually, when we're not specifically sure, but we're going to have them back. But we wanted to close our podcast this year by talking about the four major movies that are coming out on Christmas Day. We have The Imitation Game, we have Into the Woods, we have Unbroken, and we have Big Eyes. So before we get into that, guys, how's everyone doing? Michael, Josh, how are you guys doing today?
Wonderful, wonderful, and happy to be here on the Chasing Cinema podcast.
Oh, you're so nice, sir.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
All right, guys, well, let's hop right into it, because I'm sure we're going to be just going to be doing a lot of talking, and we'll see if we'll be doing a lot of arguing. I usually talk to Michael quite often, so I know his feelings about most of these pictures already. Josh, though, sometimes we've talked, sometimes we haven't, so there is some stuff we got to catch up on. So let's start off with the film Big Eyes, which is Tim Burton's new film that follows the story of the Keane artist who was originally all claimed to Walter Keane, and then we found out down the line that Margaret Keane was the one painting these photos. The film stars Amy Adams and Christoph Waltz. Let's talk about what we thought about this picture. Josh, do you want to go first? What did you feel about Tim Burton's new film?
I liked it, although I didn't like it as much as I would have liked to like it, I would say. I was a Tim Burton fan. I mean, I've been a Tim Burton fan, I would say, for a long time, especially his early work. Obviously, he has such a distinctive style that I think has gotten a little worn out over time. And so it was nice to see him changing things up and going away from the fantastical and moving into a real life story, working again with the screenwriters who wrote Ed Wood 20 years ago, which was the last time he told a true life story, which was a great film. So I think I had somewhat high hopes for this. And it's an entertaining movie. I think just the fact of the real life story, the way that that Walter Keane took credit for these paintings and became this sort of pop culture phenomenon, and the way he was such a huckster and denying to the very end that anyone else had painted these paintings, I think is in inherently entertaining story, and Burton presents it in a kind of breezy, fun way. At the same time, I felt like this didn't really go below the surface in any meaningful way. And you see Margaret Keane and you see Walter Keane, and the stuff that they're doing that's kind of inexplicable, you never really understand them as characters. So I was entertained by this movie, but I didn't feel like it really made much of an impact beyond that basic entertainment value.
I know that you said you've been a fan of Tim Burton, and, a lot of people have been fans of Tim Burton, especially his early work, as you mentioned, as I was. My favorite Tim Burton film actually being Ed Wood. Now, what was your last favorite Tim Burton film before this film, Josh? Was there any particular one that kind of stands out, or has it kind of a while back since you really loved one of his pieces?
I mean, it's been a long time since I loved a Tim Burton movie, but I tend to be a bit of a Tim Burton apologist in that I think his style, even if it's just kind of the same thing applied to various pop culture properties that someone has hired him to put his stamp on, is still entertaining. I enjoyed the CGI animated version of Frankenweenie, which I think was his last film before this, actually. So I'm not someone who says, oh, Tim Burton hasn't been good in years. I think he still makes entertaining movies. I think this is very much on the same level as something like Frankenweenie or Sweeney Todd or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, in that it's fun to watch, but it's not going to stick with you at the same level of something like Ed Wood or Edward Scissorhands or Batman, which is my personal favorite Tim Burton movie.
All right. Well, personally, I've had difficulty kind of finding, I mean, as you said, Tim Burton is probably one of the most known for his style directors that we have. Someone that you could just, even though there's a lot of directors, but for your average moviegoer, they can even see a scene and say, oh, that's a Tim Burton film. They just know it. We have just kind of inherited his style as something that we all recognize. Though I kind of feel I haven't been a fan of any of Tim Burton's kind of last films, though I don't think they were all terrible. I also thought Frankenweenie was cute. I didn't think Sweeney Todd was that bad. I kind of enjoyed that movie. But overall, I think after Ed Wood, there was kind of a steady decline because I really loved Ed Wood being my favorite piece that he's done. That really kind of, like you said, that was based on a true story, but kind of felt like it had a lot of heart to it. Though, Frankenweenie kind of had a little bit of heart, and you could argue some of the other films do. It just didn't feel like Tim Burton was coming from someone who really wanted to tell a story, especially by an artist. I thought the way he depicted Ed Wood was just incredibly touching and just very, very well told. And like you said, he did re-team up with two writers of the film from Ed Wood, Scott Alexander and Larry, I always mispronounce his last name, Karaszewski, I believe it is pronounced, and who I am a big fan of both of them when they team up. But Karaszewski has done 1408, and he's done Screwed, some things that aren't as popular, but it seems like these three together are quite a dream team. Michael, do you feel that Tim Burton has been on a successful rate? Have you enjoyed his movies as of late, or how do you feel about Tim Burton?
I'm kind of like you two guys in the fact that I love his earlier stuff. I mean, the first thing I ever saw that Tim Burton did was Vincent, which was the wonderful animated thing about the little boy that thought he was Vincent Price, narrated by Vincent Price. I absolutely fell in love with that, and I can still hear it in my head going on in the background with him doing all these wonderful little rhymey bits that he did. I adored everything he did up to Ed Wood, but sort of like, again, as everyone's been saying, he's sort of gone off into repetition land. The fact that he does so much recently, or has done so much recently with Johnny Depp, having done way too much with Helena Bonham Carter, it's just repetition. I watched, and with Alice in Wonderland that he did, was wildly disappointed. It was interesting, it was entertaining, but it wasn't what I expected from Tim Burton. And I love hearing that Josh is probably one of the few other people I can think of that really adores Burton's Batman. I thought his was absolutely spot on, very brilliant, very great combination of tongue-in-cheek and dark and everything all mixed together. But no, he's kind of gone into that I'm going into bad habits Burton, where he's doing the same sort of thing over and over and over again, featuring Johnny Depp speaking in funny accents and wearing funny outfits and looking odd. It's like, sorry, that does not necessarily a great film make. Just ask people that went to go see The Lone Ranger. But bottom line is, I do like Tim Burton. I do like what he brings to the table. I just don't necessarily always love it.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did you feel about Big Eyes, the film starring Christoph Waltz and Amy Adams?
I really liked it. And I have to agree again with Josh's thing about that we didn't really get to see a whole lot that was very revealing behind the two. But I also felt like with the character, the female character, who was actually the one doing all the work, I felt like that was sort of on purpose, in the fact that he wanted her to remain as almost mysterious and as unknown as she had been throughout the whole time that Walter was taking credit for all her work. I would have liked to have seen a bit more behind his motivation, apart from the fact that he obviously was just, a grifter. He was a con man that stumbled into this great gal that did art that everybody loved. And he was making money for it and getting instant fame, which is obviously what he wanted. But I would have liked to have seen a bit more behind, what went into his thinking, what went into his motivation, if you will. Her, I think he purposely kept her a little bit on the vague side. Yeah.
I really, really enjoyed Big Eyes. I'm not sure if it's because I felt that going into Tim Burton films, I learned to expect and then got something a little bit different. But I also felt that it was kind of a return to his roots doing this film. I mean, he was teaming up with people that he worked on in the Ed Wood film from the 90s. He's telling a story about a specific person rather than, I feel that Tim Burton's films have become more concentrating on setting and visual style than anything else. And I really, really absolutely love it when Tim Burton tells a story about a specific person, because it seems to have a lot more passion and care tied in. And I think Big Eyes was a return to that. And for that reason, I really, really actually probably loved Big Eyes. I think Amy Adams did a wonderful job. I think Christoph Waltz did a wonderful job, who we're going to talk about in a minute. But I felt that it was just, I feel that there was elements of earlier works, like I believe in the very beginning when we see suburbia and how things look to Margaret, that it's very Edward, like kind of has a flashback to Edward Scissorhands. We also stumble upon the kind of theme of just, stereotypical roles, the male of a household, as the priest tells her, the man runs the household in the film, which is something we don't really necessarily delve into in Edward Scissorhands, but the whole women are home, 5 o'clock, the men are coming home, let's run back to the house and cook dinner kind of mentality kind of reappears here. I thought the film, though I agree with you, Josh, on the point that it doesn't necessarily get so deep and so emotional where, the movie made me cry or the movie really, really touched me. But overall, I felt very enjoying what I was watching. I thought it was a very new, not necessarily new, but a different style, a different way for Tim Burton to return. I've been saying that I would love for him to kind of go back to this style. And I really, really appreciate it. And I think if he keeps doing things like this, I am going to like it again, just as much as I liked the stuff in the 90s. Josh, how did you feel about Christoph Waltz in this movie?
I thought he was entertaining, but his performance is a little manic, I guess you could say. And so, I think that contributes to the idea of not really understanding these people as people. Like, he's fun to watch. Like, I'm sure the level of charisma that the actual guy had, as this kind of con artist grifter, as Michael was saying, you get drawn into him as a character, kind of in quotes. But as a person, there's not much there below the surface. And so, again, I think that was the thing that I missed most about this movie. Not that it had to make me cry or that it had to move me in a serious emotional way, but just to feel like I better understood these people who, after all, were real people. And Margaret Keane is still alive and consulted on this movie. But I liked Christoph Waltz, and I think in general, in English language movies, Christoph Waltz is often very disappointing when he hasn't worked with Quentin Tarantino. That a lot of his performances and stuff like Terry Gilliam's The Zero Theorem or in The Green Hornet, things like that are just don't make much of an impression. But I thought in this movie he brought his talents more so than he has in some of the other roles I've seen him in recently.
So quickly, Michael, do you agree or disagree? How do you feel about Christoph Waltz? Because I know me and you kind of had a conversation about him.
Yeah, we did talk about this. I actually quite, pardon me, I actually quite liked what he did with the film, and the fact that it was so different from what he did in Horrible Bosses 2, where he played such a black-hearted, again, jovial villain, but he was so completely different in that film compared to what he was in this one, where he was, again, taking on the role of a real person. I do feel a little bit went a long way with that role, and he kind of fell back onto old habits, doing things that he's done before. I remember saying after we watched it at the cinema that it felt a little like he had borrowed quite heavily from Django, in the fact that he could be this rather cold-hearted, cold-blooded sort of chap one minute and then rather jovial the next, or clever or cute or whatever. And it was just like he was sort of rehashing it. But again, that is the magic of Christoph Waltz. That's what he does, and he does it spectacularly well. I quite enjoyed him in the film. I know there were others that were in the cinema on the day that weren't impressed at all, but I thought he did, considering the amount of information that was given, I thought he did quite well.
And I agree. I agree with both of you. I think he was very charismatic, as this con man should be, as he is trying to, just manipulate as he does throughout the film. Now, this film, however, isn't getting much award buzz. Do you guys agree with that or disagree with that? Do you think this is one of the films that might be getting snubbed? Josh, how do you feel?
No, I don't think it's getting snubbed. I mean, I think people maybe have this assumption that a story about real people starring two previous Academy Award nominees is an automatic shoo-in for all these awards. But even though I enjoyed it, to me it's not something that made my top 10 list. It's not something that necessarily deserves awards for anything. It doesn't have the best performances or writing or any kind of thing of the year. So I liked it, but I don't think it's any kind of injustice that it's not getting that awards attention.
And as me and Michael pointed out, though, the true story formula is something that is very popular this year, as
Yes.
3 of the 4 films we're going to be talking about today are based on true stories, and 2 of the 4 that we talked about last week were based on true stories, Foxcatcher and Wild. Now, Michael, what do you feel about the Oscar buzz or award buzz in general for this film? Are you disappointed, or do you think it's, it just didn't make the cut?
I'm a little disappointed in the fact that, and probably because I remember that time period very, very well, I kind of felt like the whole film captured that bit of Americana, that slice of Americana at that time period brilliantly, and the way people felt. And, okay, it doesn't necessarily go very much towards her performance, but the costumes and the sets and everything really did feel like we were right back in 1950s, 60s, America. And whoever set up the hairstyle for Amy Adams and her outfits, she looked like she belonged back in that time period. And her characterization felt like it belonged as well. It's kind of hard to describe it that way, but that's the best way I could think to say it. She felt like she came from that time. Mm-hmm. Just as Christoph Waltz did. And I think it's a shame that it hasn't gotten more attention, because it's one of those where I think between the writing, and probably because of the fact that Margaret Keane did help quite a lot on the whole thing, the writing and the having the chat with the at least one person involved with it really brought it to life very, very well. And I'm kind of surprised it hasn't done better than that, to be very honest.
As much as I say that I probably enjoyed the film, and I probably maybe say that I enjoyed it more than both Michael and Josh, that I'm not super surprised, just because this year just seems really, really strong. As me and Michael have been saying in the previous podcasts, that this has been an incredibly strong year. I'm really excited to hear both of these gentlemen's lists, because I can't imagine what is on them. I know that there have been a lot of favorites, and it just feels like every week we're going, we were going to see something that was, this is definitely, award worthy, and probably in my top 10, just kept, backing up, and before you know it, I was just like, man, there's so many, I don't know if I could fit them all on a top 10 list. So for that, I think that kind of is justified in the sense that I think it's a really good movie, but I think it's going to have trouble standing with films such that are going to be more in the award conversation. Moving on, we're going to be talking about the film The Imitation Game, which I believe has released in other places, but not here. It's going to be opening in Las Vegas on Christmas Day, which obviously, when you're listening to this, it already has, starring Keira Knightley and Benedict Cumberbatch. Michael, do you want to talk about The Imitation Game really bit and what it's about?
You bet. Alan Turing, who is the man who cracked Enigma, I've called the film, since I first heard about it, The English Getting Enigma Back, because the Americans stole it from them. Either was it last year or the year before, where they took all the credit for capturing and decoding and everything with their sort of fictionalized setup of how Enigma actually worked. And Enigma, for those who may not know, was what the Nazis used to code all their wartime missives, all their messages out to their various sundry little tiny Nazis that were in other places, killing and maiming and doing horrible things in Europe. All of them went through this machine, so no one could break it. No one knew where they were going to strike next. This really brilliant mathematician, Alan Turing, who was at that time a closet homosexual because it was against the law in that country to be gay or to practice being gay, was hired amongst a few other of the best brains in Britain to set in and try and crack Enigma. And it's basically the tale of him intermingling with these people, including one woman, which was Keira Knightley. And the film starts out on a false note. In fact, he's much older. His house has been broken into. The police are investigating. And this is how we get the backstory to where he is at the time, and we learn what happens to him. It's an absolutely brilliantly English film. It's one, I think I said on the day, that you can smell the cups of tea and the scones while you're watching it. It's absolutely brilliant. And despite the lack of a lot of action, it is a war film. And it's something that I think Cumberbatch just absolutely blew completely out of the water. He did a brilliant job at it.
Yeah, the film has went on to earn 5 Golden Globe nominations, including Best Picture. Mr. Cumberbatch earned a Best Actor nomination. We have a supporting actress for Keira Knightley. We have Best Screenplay and Original Score. Josh, how did you feel about The Imitation Game, and what were your thoughts on the performances in the film as a whole?
I thought the film as a whole and pretty much everything about it was thoroughly mediocre. I think this is a perfect example of the boring, kind of sanitized biopic formula that we see here at the end of the year often in movies like this, and The Theory of Everything, which is the Stephen Hawking movie that came out like a month ago or so, I believe, and as well as Unbroken, which I think we're going to be talking about later.
Yes.
I think Benedict Cumberbatch is a perfectly fine actor. Keira Knightley also. Everything here is done adequately, but without much passion or excitement. I felt like this story was very streamlined and sanitized with a lot of kind of cliched little inspirational quotes that they pepper throughout the dialogue. What happened to Alan Turing obviously was a huge injustice and a great tragedy, and then you don't really feel the impact of that here in this movie. And again, I think also, like The Theory of Everything, this is a movie about someone who was a brilliant scientist who did some incredibly complicated things that are really simplified and dumbed down and kind of glossed over in a movie like this. I did think there were some exciting sequences in this movie. As Michael says, it's a war movie, and so there's a genuine urgency to what they're doing in terms of trying to break this code. And some of the code breaking stuff was exciting, but overall, I thought it was a really mid-level mediocre film.
So just to kind of break the conversation real quick, Josh, I guess we didn't talk about it. So by what you kind of just said, you weren't a huge fan of Theory of Everything, I'm assuming.
No, I didn't particularly like Theory of Everything either. I think those movies, this
Wow.
movie and The Theory of Everything, are even in the way that they approach the whole biopic thing. I think they're both mediocre films with solid but not spectacular elements, including performances and music and whatnot. Neither of them wowed me in any way.
Okay. So do you feel how do you feel about the 5 Golden Globes, Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress? Do you think it's going to happen for them coming up in the Oscar season, or how do you feel about their awards, at least? I know you said that you think that Cumberbatch is a fine actor, but do you feel he's deserving of the Golden Globe or Academy Award this year?
No, none of those award nominations are deserving for this movie, I don't think. But they're not surprising. I mean, movies like this, as we were saying with regards to Big Eyes, these kind of true stories, especially a movie like this that is made out to be super inspirational, again, along the lines of Theory of Everything or Unbroken, always get tons of awards attention. Really, as long as you don't completely screw it up, I think you're almost guaranteed to get that awards attention for a movie like this. I fully expect this to end up in the Oscar nomination pool along with Theory of Everything. I don't think it's deserved, but it doesn't surprise me in any way.
And of course, just a quick reminder, we are talking to Michael Smith and Josh Bell. Michael Smith, you could find all of his information at mikesfilmtalk.com or follow him on Twitter, because if you follow him on Twitter, he tweets out all of his stuff, and that's at Mike's Film Talk. Then we have Josh Bell, who locally Las Vegas writes the Las Vegas Weekly. You can find all of his stuff at Josh Bell Hates Everything, or follow him on Twitter, because I know he tweets out all of his reviews and stuff at Signal Bleed. So, Michael, what do you feel about the Oscar contention for The Imitation Game and Benedict Cumberbatch? Do you feel that do you disagree, or basically do you disagree or agree with Josh? Do you think that he has a shot? Where do you feel like it's going to be deserved if he does take the gold home?
Well, I do agree that it's fait accompli that a message film is going to be trotted out for an Oscar gong. That's what Hollywood does. You've heard me say this in the past. Mm-hmm. Poor Steven Spielberg didn't get a look in until he made the black and white Schindler's List. I've got to make a gravitas message film. Otherwise, the Academy's never going to notice me. This is Steven saying this to himself, and every director knows that's the way it works. So obviously, at this point in time in year, there are a couple of ones that want to do message films. I agree that Cumberbatch is a given, that he's going to be trotted out for the gong, whether it be Golden Globes or the Oscar. Whether he gets it or not, I don't know, because I think his biggest competition is in the other Brit flick of the year, and that's The Theory of Everything. I voted for him in my little ballot, and I still maintain the guy that really rocked it right out of the court, regardless of the lack of excitement factor, is Eddie Redmayne. I think the man just absolutely captured Hawking 110% and didn't go into a caricature, not once. Absolutely fantastic. But again, these were films. They are message films for all intents and purposes. They're character studies. They're not an exciting film. They're not, on the same par as, say, Gone Girl or some of the other, really slick things we've seen this year, or even as exciting as The Messenger, which is another message film, if you will. Not wanting to be too punny with it, but it was Jeremy Renner being a bit more exciting.
And you're talking about Kill the Messenger, right?
Yes, Kill the Messenger. Sorry, I left out the kill.
No worries. I just wanted to verify. Yeah, I think one of the strongest elements that The Imitation Game has, and one of its weakest elements, is about the theme. This film tends to have really kind of a voice about something, but I feel like it kind of doesn't appear in the film till kind of the closing act of the film.
Yes.
And it goes on to say a lot more in the very end moments when it kind of brings up text and says what kind of happens. And to me, though there is this conversation that happens during the film, and, we see kind of his character begin to decline during the second half of the film, and it kind of becomes a very apparent theme, I feel like it just kind of felt not thrown in there. I don't want to say that because it didn't feel like that, but it did feel kind of late to the game, and that it could have been
almost tacked on. I know exactly what you mean. It almost felt like it was tacked on. So, by the way, we told you this story, but wait, this happened as well.
Yeah, it did feel like that. I felt like, I know that they were trying to say something. They definitely made a statement at the end about, his injustice and what happened to him. And I think they really wanted you to hear that. But at the same time, I felt like, the most effort they put into it was just writing it text and putting it on the end of the screen. And I think that was kind of Imitation Game's biggest flaw for me, though I do feel Cumberbatch and Knightley delivered pretty solid performances.
See, that's where we disagree, because I was going to say that one thing.
I was just about to ask you guys.
Yeah, I did not consider that Keira Knightley gave any sort of award-winning performance with that film. Her part, and we've said this the other day, her part is slightly bigger than a cameo. She's barely on screen.
Yes, I agree. I do not think it is award worthy, though. I think it was solid. I don't think it was a bad performance. I think she was able to work really well with Cumberbatch. I don't think she deserves any award. I don't think she'll win the Golden Globe. I don't think she'll win an Oscar, even if she is nominated. But I do feel her performance was well endowed with Cumberbatch. Do you agree, Josh?
Well, I mean, as I said, I don't think anything about this movie is award worthy, but no, I mean, she was fine. She gave a perfectly acceptable performance. To me, it didn't seem like that tiny a role. I mean, it's the second most important part in the movie, even if the movie is really focused on Turing and on Cumberbatch's performance. But her character is important. In fact, some people, critics of the movie, have said that they give this character or this person, it's a real person, far more importance than she actually held in the life of Alan Turing, which I don't really know anything about that. But no, I think she's a good actress. I think this is certainly not the best role she's ever had, but she does her best with what she's got, and it's a fine performance. But no, I don't think anything about this movie is deserving of awards.
Very, very interesting. I mean, it's great to have this kind of these all three different opinions going on here at ChasingCinema.com's podcast. Again, we are joined by Michael Smith and Josh Bell. You can find all of Josh Bell's work at Signal Bleed and JoshBellHatesEverything.com. He'll have all of his reviews posted for the films that we are talking about today, including Imitation Game and Big Eyes. Michael, you can find all Mike's stuff at Mike's Film Talk on Twitter, and Mike's Mike'sFilmTalk.com, where you can read all of his reviews. And I know he's been reviewing a ton of stuff. And, he also does television and other things that he's constantly reviewing. So make sure to follow both these men on Twitter to just see what they're writing about, because they're always writing about something. Again, that's for Josh Bell, it's at SignalBleed. And for Michael Smith, it's at Mike's Film Talk. Moving on now to a very different paced film. It's the only film that we're going to be talking about today that isn't based on a true story. And that is a film that comes from director Rob Marshall, and that is Into the Woods. Josh, can you please tell people what Into the Woods is about?
Into the Woods is about fairy tale characters, I guess you could say. It's based on the Stephen Sondheim stage musical, which I personally have not ever seen on stage. I don't know if either of you guys have.
I've not seen Into the Woods in any form besides this film.
Yeah, same here.
And okay, so we're all
We're on the
coming
same
into
page.
it with the same lack of knowledge here. But it is based on a very well-known and beloved by many people stage production by Stephen Sondheim that takes kind of a mashup approach to fairy tale characters, I guess you could say, which we're very familiar with now with shows like Once Upon a Time or the comic book series Fables. But 30 years ago, this was maybe less common. And so you see Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella and some of these other characters all come together in a story really largely about sexuality, I think, is the way it came across to me. But kind of a dark story about people being disillusioned with their hopes for the world, and little girls being eaten by wolves, and giants smashing people, and kind of dark subject matter, I guess, for fairy tales and for singing. Although I'm sure part of the idea here is to remind people that those original Grimm's fairy tales were in fact very brutal and very dark. So I guess that's the general gist of what the story is
what
here.
The film is about.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of excitement going into this film. It is a very, very highly advertised film. I've seen the film advertised more, I think, more than the other three films that we are going to be talking, or we have talked about / going to be talking about today. I know this is a highly anticipated film. I did my stint in theater in high school, and I heard quite a few songs from Into the Woods, and I heard a lot of people talk about it. Never got a chance to really hear it, and I knew the film was coming out, and I said, all right, well, I'll watch it. And this was a film, though, I am a huge admitted Meryl Streep fan, big fan of hers, so I was pretty excited going into this film. Now, Michael, tell us, how did you feel about Into the Woods?
Well, apart from the fact that I remember somebody being quite shocked when I said this, that this is probably the most misogynistic production I've ever seen in my entire life. If you wore a skirt, had long hair, had boobs, and your name was Sally or any other variation thereof, you were going to die, be hurt badly, or just have something really horrific happen to you in the show. So it's not a good place to be a woman, Into the Woods. If you are, I don't think you do quite well, my dear. I think something horrible is going to happen to you. Even Little Red Riding Hood, who was saved ultimately. But it was interesting. I felt like the only character that was allowed to sing was Meryl Streep. I also think that's the only reason why they hired her, which we had this conversation the other day where I was like, oh, we know Meryl can sing. She did it in that ABBA thing. So let's put her in this and let her belt a little bit and impress the audience. Everyone else did that sort of horrid sing-speak that Rex Harrison did for all of that Dr. Dolittle horrific thing that he did back in the 60s, and that Richard Burton did a bit for Camelot and so on and so forth. But, I mean, the bottom line is, overall, the musical numbers did not impress me. I did get a kick out of the film. I thought it was entertaining. I did enjoy it overall. But it was one of those that with all the hoopla that came up with the film and everything behind it and the marketing and so on, I really expected to love it. Because I do love musicals if they're done well. But I didn't love this film. In fact, the most excited I got about the entire film, and I think you might have been there when this happened, was there were two actresses that I know from England that I've watched them work for years on United Kingdom television. One was the delightful Lynette Crosby, who played the long-suffering wife of an old-age pensioner in One Foot in the Grave, and Frances de la Tour, who was the giant. And when I saw those two on screen, I got so excited because it was like, yes, you've really picked some fantastic, character actresses, to work in this thing and give them teeny tiny little parts. But that was my favorite bit of the film, to be really honest. The rest of it was okay. I enjoyed it, but it didn't really win me over. I won't be rushing out to see the stage show, which I understand is even longer than the film.
It is quite interesting to see this type of film come out of Rob Marshall, who has delivered, films that are really praised, such as Memoirs of Geisha or Chicago,
yes.
a musical that I absolutely love and I think is wonderful. Though he also was the director behind Nine and the On Strangers' Tides of the Pirates of the Caribbean films, which weren't as praised. So it is kind of interesting to see his track record. Josh, what did you feel about Into the Woods? And did you enjoy? Were you singing your way out of the theater? Yes or no?
No, I wouldn't say that I was singing my way out of the theater, and I think Michael is right in that the singing in this film is not particularly good. I think, unfortunately, it reflects the Hollywood trend that we saw in Annie as well, that was just released, where in musicals generally they're casting movie stars who are famous regardless of whether they are able to sing or not. And so in this case, you have someone like Meryl Streep, who is awful in Mamma Mia, which is, I think, a horrible, horrible movie, and cannot at all movie, and it does a better job here. I think there are some people in this movie who do have musical theater experience. Anna Kendrick, who plays Cinderella, I thought did a good job. And the two children, actually, whose names I don't know, but Little Red Riding Hood and Jack of the Beanstalk, both are also musical theater veterans who I thought had slightly better singing voices. But even among them, the singing in this movie is not particularly impressive. And if you're not having great singing, then it's obviously not going to be a good showcase for the music, which I would imagine seeing it on stage is probably more impressive. And in a way, weirdly enough, because I wasn't crazy about this movie, I came out of it thinking I would like to see it on stage because I bet it would be a more enjoyable experience. The other thing, again, as Michael mentioned, the stage show is a lot longer. And the second act, which in the movie is a bit rushed after it appears kind of everything has ended with this happily ever after, and then suddenly things are not what they appear and bad stuff starts happening. In the movie, that's maybe the last 30, 40 minutes of the film. But I believe in the stage show, it's an equal amount of time to the first act. So I think pacing-wise, in a weird way, making it longer might have helped with the pacing because it wouldn't make that final act feel so rushed and feel like sort of a tacked-on thing to make the point about how happily ever after is a sham and things don't really wrap up the way that you want them to in a fairy tale. So that was a little disappointing, I think, pacing-wise. I think, again, Michael, what you said about the misogyny of the story, which I didn't think was maybe as pronounced as you saw it, but I think it is there, but I think that's part of Sondheim's point about fairy tales. It's not so much that this movie or the stage show is misogynistic. It's that fairy tales are that way and that they exist to enforce these sort of rigid gender roles, especially given the time at which they were composed and popularized. So I think the movie and Sondheim's story in general is trying to challenge that and to show you that these stories aren't as happy and nicely resolved as you think they might be. And I don't think the movie necessarily gets that across as well as it might do on stage, but I think that is kind of meant to be the point of the story.
To finish Josh's thought, he was talking about Lila Crawford, who played Little Red Riding Hood, and Daniel Huddlestone, who played Jack of the Beanstalk.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, sir. And I think Josh hit a real point that I really want to talk about. I don't know if, Josh is just being a little bit nice, but I really did not like this movie. I just was kind of totally thrown off. I think one of my disadvantages, because I knew of this, I had such high hopes, not because of trailers or anything, but because I've heard for so long how great Into the Woods was as a play, and how all my theater friends, would tell me, and how people would just say, oh, Into the Woods, Into the Woods. So immediately when I finished Into the Woods, I said, I need to ask these people what they were thinking. But it was brought to my attention that, that there is that the part that feels obviously incredibly rushed and so tacked on and feels like it's totally out of place is an equal half of the stage play. So I think that is probably a major criticism, is that this film is going one way, and to my, maybe to my, to kind of justify what I'm thinking, is that I was expecting what the first act gave me, something very light, something very playful, though there is some very interesting things that they do that feel a little bit, different. I really kind of enjoyed how the film, though wanted you to believe that you were in this world. Also felt that it was very theatrical, as if it was on stage. One of the things I talked about in my review was, you know, the way that instead of making a CGI created version of the wolf, of the big bad wolf, we have Johnny Depp dress up as if he was a student in a play playing the wolf. He doesn't look like a wolf, you know, he just has these huge whiskers, but it's him. I really kind of like that style, and I wish they would have done that a lot more in the film, instead of just kind of going, well, no, he's the only character that kind of looks like that. But there are moments, you know, especially when we get into, you know, I'm not just, I don't think this is a spoiler, but when we get into the stomach of the wolf, you know, it kind of just has this really nice theatrical feeling that I enjoyed. But beyond that, I think the story just kind of really put me off. I really didn't know what the film was trying to tell me. I keep saying that the film should have ended when we had this, you know, kind of, and they all lived happily ever after, and then it's interrupted. Not because I wanted the happy ending, but because after that, I thought characters were making decisions that just didn't make sense. I thought they were just, you know, the dialogue was just to walk us through what we've missed, and they didn't feel was important enough to put on screen. I just felt so completely left behind, not even left behind, but just, you know, confused on how this film was so, you know, on it, and if not repetitive, but then when we came to this last part, it's just, oh, by the way, this happened to this character, oh, by the way, this happened to that character, by the way, everything was an afterthought, and that really, really put me off. I didn't care really what was going on, though I will say, because I am a fan of Meryl Streep, I really enjoyed her in this film, though she's not the best singer. I didn't feel this musical really had a lot of quote-unquote songs. It just kind of felt like, as Michael said, they were all just kind of putting words to this melody that we hear throughout the entire story.
Which never changes. Every song had the same melody, which was absolutely maddening.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I was kind of expecting this, you know, really interesting musical part, and then I just felt that the movie kind of betrayed its characters overall. I mean, there's a pretty critical scene when we lose a main character and a character's reaction. I'm waiting for this character's reaction, and instead of this gentleman reacting the way that I believe he should, and the way that the first half of the movie tells me he should, he just begins singing about blame, and to me that was a real turnoff. And I just did not buy that as, you know, how they kind of acted in the very beginning of the film. So to me, Into the Woods is probably not one of my least favorite films of the year, but at this time when it is coming out, and when this film obviously is trying to kind of make a statement with these films that are around it, it was a major disappointment for me. Though the Hollywood Foreign Press doesn't seem to believe so, as the film earned 3 Golden Globe nominations. We have Best Motion Picture, and just a quick reminder for those who don't remember that the Golden Globes are split up for Best Actor, Best Supporting, Best Picture for Drama, and then Comedy and Musical. So this was nominated for Best Picture of Comedy and Musical. Emily Blunt was nominated for Best Actress in a Comedy Musical, and Meryl Streep earned a Supporting Actress nomination for Best Supporting Actress in a Comedy or Musical. Now, to me, mind-boggling. Do you guys agree? Michael, how do you feel about these 3 Golden Globe nominations?
I'm a bit gobsmacked, but then having said that, it's that sort of thing where we talked about this the other day, I think, really, really briefly, because I always get really excited about the 2 character actresses that are firm favorites. But I think this got an awful lot of attention, or an awful lot of credit, just from the fact that they use an awful lot, and how many times can you say awful lot in one sentence, of English actors, ones that have been in quite a number of recent feature films. And I don't know whether this was because it was most likely, almost all of it, I think, filmed in the UK around like Pinewood Studios and around those areas. And they felt like it was somewhat obligatory, or if they were doing it to sort of give some sort of, I don't know, respectability to the show. I mean, they've got Lucy Punch, and then obviously the bit I thought about this the whole time you're talking about Emily Blunt. James Corden and Emily Blunt, both English as, I don't know, wall sausages, but they didn't interact well. To me, they never felt like a real couple. And I don't put that down to Blunt, because I happen to absolutely adore Emily Blunt, but it's taken me a long time to get there. James Corden, it was not that long ago, he was doing films like, Lesbian Vampire Killers and things like that. You know, he's not a grade A Richard Burton, Richard Harris type, you know, number one actor. To throw him in that role still kind of surprises me, and I just never felt like those 2 ever really clicked off. And because of that, I don't feel like what Emily's done, despite the fact that I do love her and adore her and would have her children if at all possible, I don't think anything she did is really award worthy. in that particular film.
And what about Streep? Does she deserve,
No.
as she is the golden queen, the golden statue queen? Did she? Yeah, I was really dumbfounded about this. Josh, what do you feel about these nominations?
Well, I mean, again, I think there's two things to think about here. One is this deserved? And I don't think it is, although I didn't hate the movie by any means. I thought it was actually an entertaining, if flawed film, and so I didn't feel nearly as strongly about it as you did. But I don't think it deserves the awards. And like Michael, I think Emily Blunt is great, but I think if Emily Blunt deserved an award for anything this year, it was Edge of Tomorrow.
Yes.
But so that's one issue of whether we think this movie deserves awards. The other issue, of course, is that the Golden Globes love celebrities. And if there's a possibility for them to get celebrities to come to the Golden Globes, they will take it. And so, of course, they're going to nominate some big, fancy Disney musical spectacle. And of course, they're going to nominate Meryl Streep. And of course, they're going to nominate Emily. I'm surprised they didn't nominate Johnny Depp for this movie. I mean, this is the organization that gave Johnny Depp an award nomination for The Tourist a couple years ago.
I brought that up in the last podcast.
So the Golden Globes are nothing if not completely shameless when it comes to taking I'm sure they had a big fancy party for the Golden Globes voters to convince them to vote for this movie, and they'll swallow that easily. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they nominated this for awards. But no, I agree. It's not deserved.
And this is why I do what I do, and I absolutely love having the podcast, because I have these two great minds making me all giddy and laughy this holiday season. Again, this is ChasingCinema.com as official podcast as we are closing out the year reviewing 4 different films. And with me, I have Josh Bell of the Las Vegas Weekly and Michael Smith of the Guardian Liberty Voice. You could find all of their work on Twitter. You could follow Michael at Mike's Film Talk, and you can follow Josh at Signal Bleed. Both their work can be found on their personal websites. We have mikesfilmtalk.com, and Josh Bell Hates Everything. Even though Josh Bell doesn't seem to hate everything today, which is interesting. So we are moving on to our last picture, which is definitely an anticipated picture. I think a lot of people are very interested in seeing it. Maybe not so much for story or, the fact that it is an end of year, but more because of the director behind the film. And this is her second directorial film, and that is Angelina Jolie's Unbroken. Unbroken follows the true story of a World War II vet and Olympian, Louis Zamperini, who spends 47 days on a raft after a plane crash in World War II, and then was caught by the Japanese Navy and was sent to a prisoner of war camp. The film stars Jack O'Connell, and I'm trying to, I'm going to say Mayavi is the name that I'm going to go with and try to pronounce. The actor who is actually a Japanese rock star and composer that I've not really seen, or though he's not much of an actor, brought onto this film. We have Unbroken. Again, this is a film that I also learned, did not know this going into the film, only learned this as the credits ran, that it was partly written, I believe it was a rewrite from Joel and Ethan Coen, which to me was the complete shocker of everything. Michael, how did you feel about Unbroken, Angelina Jolie's new film?
It could very easily have been a lot shorter. Mm-hmm. It was a very, very long, grueling watch. One of those films where I kind of felt a lot like I felt when I watched Sands of Iwo Jima and Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers. It's another long picture postcard look at a hero that has before now not been known to everyone in the public eye. I enjoyed the film. I enjoyed what it depicted. And I think Jolie did a splendid job editing, popping everything together. It worked quite well where it worked. In other places, it didn't work at all. But I think that's probably down to the fact that it was massively overlong. I think you and I saw this at the same time, and we both agreed. I actually was more fascinated by the chap who was the enlisted commandant of the prison camp than I was of the man that he couldn't break.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, for as much as this was an ode or a tribute to him, he was not a totally three-dimensional character. he was very one-sided. We just got to see one side of him. It wasn't until after I sat down after watching the film and did a little bit of research and learned more about him that I grew to admire more about his character. And I think that Jolie made the idea that people knew the story beforehand going in so they'd understand more about it than what actually is shown. But it was a good film, and I take my hat off to her. I think she did an absolutely brilliant job with it. Just way too long, and maybe could have gone a bit more in depth with some things and left some other things out.
I completely agree. You know, this movie is a film that you can watch a trailer and you know it's saying inspiring, you know, to really, really lift you up and not criticizing the film. And I think I totally agree with you. This is a very valiant effort by Jolie, though I think the film has plenty of problems. I don't think it was a terrible movie, but to me, you know, a film like this that is supposed to inspire me and move me, I really didn't have much emotion watching the film. I really didn't get that inspiring thing. To kind of talk about what me and you were talking about afterwards, I think some of that had to do with Jack O'Connell, who played our main character, who I feel I don't want to. I mean, he seems to be very charismatic, but in this film, he was a face that I constantly lost in the crowd.
Yes.
I think there's a point in the film when he is lost on a raft lost on a raft with two other people from his airplane, and I was more interested in those characters than I was watching him. And as the film progressed, you know, there one specific scene, and I actually told Michael this as we were leaving theater, where we're supposed to be watching his reaction, but my eyes could not necessarily find him, but wandered other reactions because I just felt he lacked this overall presence. I think, like many people going to this film, I was not familiar with his story or what happened to this gentleman, this Olympian. And I really found it difficult to kind of feel that inspiration or feel that moving thing of this man's journey, so much as I know I was watching a movie that's supposed to be inspiring, but never felt moved, never felt inspired. I think that I agree with you on length. I think the film did kind of really take its time and really, you know, concentrate on the suffering of this man. And I don't know if it was because of him, of O'Connell and his presence that I didn't necessarily feel or get emotion from, but I felt like I was watching this movie from a plate glass window that I could not get through, I could not get involved in, or connected to. Though I will agree with you, and as we both said, I completely enjoyed the latter half of the film because of Mayavi, who is actually a Japanese rock star that Angelina had come on and play the bird. Also, Watanabe, who was a army sergeant that was in charge of this camp. I felt he totally brought a presence and was something that a character that I became very interested in and very enthralled in what he would do. Their interactions were quite well, but I was more interested in him. Not saying I'm supporting what, but just more interested in him as a character and wanted to know more about the man who was trying to break the man that goes unbroken. I was really interested in him, and I felt that if I'm more interested in watching this character rather than the character that is supposed to move me, then Angelina must have done something wrong. And to me, that was my biggest issue with the film. Mr. Josh Bell, how do you feel? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What were your thoughts on Angelina Jolie's Unbroken?
I think you guys have gotten to a lot of the biggest problems with this movie. The main issue for me was the fact that this character is not a person, and that, I mean, which is sad because of course he is a person. He is a real person that inspired this movie who just died a few months ago.
Yes.
And yet, at the same time, this movie presents him as such a superhuman character that he is this larger-than-life hero that you can't ever connect to him on an emotional level. And even as the movie kind of wallows in the horrible treatment that he had at the hands of the Japanese, it doesn't feel inspirational or moving or affecting in any way. And it is more just kind of grueling. I agree that the movie is... It's not necessarily even that it's too long, but just that it's poorly paced and that it spends long stretches of time on different aspects of the story that don't necessarily connect to each other. And the whole prisoner of war segment of the film, which is the way that they've been marketing it and the way that it's been sort of presented to people, doesn't take place until almost halfway through the movie. So I think that was frustrating. I think this, as I mentioned with the Imitation Game, this is very much follows this kind of inspirational biopic formula. The score in this movie I thought was relentlessly oppressive and just hitting you over the head with how inspired you ought to feel. There was a lot of clunky dialogue. As Jake mentioned, it's written at least in part by the Coen brothers. They're two of the, I think, 4 credited screenwriters and presumably other uncredited writers. So I don't know how much of their material actually made it into the film, but it is disappointing to see writers who are distinctive like that work on something that is completely not distinctive in any way.
Yes.
And I agree that Miyavi, or however you pronounce his name, the Japanese actor, was the most entertaining part of the film. Although I think in a way the fact that he was entertaining points to another problem with the movie, is that this character is played like a James Bond villain or something, and he's fun to watch because he's so evil and he's so nasty. But like Zamperini, he was a real person, and you don't get a sense of him as a real person either. He's fun to watch. He's entertaining. I kind of wanted him to break Zamperini because I was more interested in him.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, I think it's a flaw of the movie that it can't present you with real people when it's telling you a story about real people, and that's Jolie's fault, and that's the screenplay's fault, and that's Jack O'Connell's fault. Whose hair looks fabulous throughout the film, no matter how poorly he's treated. He's got amazing hair. So I know he's a big rising star, and he's got a couple other roles in films that I haven't seen that are supposed to be really impressive. Starred Up, the prison drama that did open this year, and there's a drama called 71 about the Irish Troubles that I think is going to open next year. And maybe he's much better in those, but I was very disappointed in his performance here.
I completely agree, and I don't consider what I'm going to say spoilers. However, if you do not want to know anything about this film, fast forward about a minute or two, because I want to ask these gentlemen about something specific, and to kind of close the topic and then ask them something. One of my things. How I kind of really knew that I was following the bird and really caring about his character is that there is one scene when our main character has found out that the war is over and that they're going to be freed, and he goes into this room where this army sergeant would have stayed, and we see this picture in a wallet. And though it kind of feels a little bit not necessarily fit for this movie, I felt at that moment I felt something about that character. I learned something about that character that made him just a little bit more in-depthful than than the character from Jack O'Connell. And I thought that kind of really spoke to me, that I felt more from this, watching this one photo, than, how I felt the entire 2 and some odd hours that I've been with Jack O'Connell. Now, one thing I want to talk to you guys about, I want to know if you agree or disagree. The only part where I felt inspired or emotional whatsoever is the actual clip that we see at the very end of the film when we see the real man running in Tokyo, I believe it is, for the Olympics when he's carrying the torch. Yes. Did you guys agree? Did you not agree? How did you feel about that moment? Because I thought that was the only moment where I really felt it, in which it led me to believe that, as inspiring as this story is, I don't know if I believe truly that I would have been more inspired by watching one of those 15-minute YouTube clips that you find on Facebook or Twitter that tell this story that you don't know about, and just you talk to the guy, you hear his story, you see pictures, and it was that much moving. And I knew that when I saw that clip. Do you guys agree, disagree? Michael, why don't you go first?
I'm like you. I got the biggest kick out of seeing the real Louis Zamperini, actually realizing his dream, because I think part of the problem that Louis had was the fact that in real life, this man was an athlete more than he was anything else. And it was his stubbornness and his ability to focus on physical things that managed to get him through this whole thing. He wasn't a charismatic chap. He was just, a guy that skirted on the edge of trouble, but who had big dreams. And one of his big dreams before the war was to run in Tokyo. And the fact that they used that Jolie chose that as the way to cap off the film, I thought was brilliant. And I actually enjoyed that more than I enjoyed the entire film, to be very honest, because I think part of the problem was the fact that good old what's his name? What was his name that played Jack O'Connell? I think part of his problem is he's a Brit. And it's another of this thing where they're constantly throwing English actors in American roles, and some of them can do the accents really well. Some of them cannot. In this instance, O'Connell did a very good job, and I just kind of got the feeling that the reason why he did such a good job was he was really concentrating on that and not particularly quite so much on his acting. Just quite possibly my
Mr. Bell, how do you feel about the assessment of the final clip and Jack O'Connell?
Well, I mean, sure, that final clip, I mean, it's a very nice thing that he was able to do that, towards the end of his life and go back to, I guess actually it wasn't really, it was quite a few years ago. And he lived a long time after that. But anyway, as he was much older, was able to go back and of course then another thing that comes up in those final title cards is how he dedicated himself to forgiveness and tolerance and all of that later in his life. But to me, I thought including that clip was just indicative of the pseudo inspirational pandering of the movie. That that watching this old man run with the Olympic torch is instant tear jerking. That's why people post those videos on Facebook.
Yeah.
It's because it's just this shortcut to a kind of a cheap emotion. So no, I wasn't moved any more by that clip than I was by the rest of the movie. I agree that Jack O'Connell's performance is lacking, whether it's because he's trying too hard to do an accent or whatever the reason, it doesn't get it across. I will say that this movie is based on a book, which I have not read, but I read more fascinating than this movie, profile on the author of the book in the New York Times. She was also the author of the book Seabiscuit.
Yes.
And just the little mentions of the style of the book make it sound a lot more in-depth and a lot more personal than the movie is. So that may be the best way to get the story of this guy if you're interested in the story of Louis Zamperini. But the movie I don't think is it.
And that, again, was Josh Bell, who I guess doesn't cry at the Facebook videos like I do, but that's okay. Again, you can find all of Josh's work at joshbellhateseverything.com and on Twitter at SignalBleed. And we're also joined by Michael Smith. You can find all of his work at mikesfilmtalk.com and find him at Twitter at mikesfilmtalk. I'm going to ask you guys just two more questions that might be a little bit tough. And wrapping up this podcast, and then I'll let you guys go. I know I've kept you, I'm sure, long enough. But really quick, so let's rank these films, if you will. 1 to 4, we have Imitation Game, Big Eyes, Unbroken, and Into the Woods. If you had to put them in order, my order would be going from best to worst, or just not best to worst, but let's say you need to see these films 1 to 4. I'm going to say The Imitation Game, Big Eyes, Unbroken, and Into the Woods. Michael, what do you think?
The only thing I would change on that is I would say Big Eyes first.
Okay.
Just because it's a closer story. It's something that's happened more recently. It's something I think that people might identify with a bit quicker and see it as being something quite unique. I love the touch at the end where she decides to tell the truth because she became a Jehovah's Witness, one of the most vilified and disliked churches in America. In fact, in England as well, come to think of it. I thought that was just bitterly ironic and brilliant touch. I think that's just slightly ahead of Imitation Game for me, but the rest of it, you got it spot on.
And Josh?
I would rank Big Eyes at the top. As well. I don't think any of these are must-see movies. I don't think any of these are movies that you need to rush out to the theater to go see. But yeah, I would put Big Eyes at the top, followed by Into the Woods, and then Imitation Game and Unbroken.
Okay.
Into
the Woods, number 2. Woo!
Yeah, I mean, not to say that I thought it was a must-see film, but I found that movie entertaining. I found Big Eyes entertaining, whereas the other two I found mostly tiresome.
Yes, but you tapped on an interesting point. My second question is, besides these films or including these films, what would you guys recommend our listeners to go see, to rush to the theaters for as we are closing the year? It doesn't have to necessarily be your favorite film. I don't want to put you on that spot yet because I know we're all probably still thinking about it and still debating on what we're going to go with. But what film do you think people need to go see? What's the first one that comes to your mind that you feel people need to go watch and you've been recommending to people? Michael?
I will, and this is one that came out much earlier in the year, but it has so far been my favorite film of the year, bar none, because it touched me on many different levels, all of them funny, and that is Guardian of the Galaxy. If you're going to go watch a film in the cinema, in IMAX, 3D, whatever, and you want to get the full effort, don't pick it up and watch it on Blu-ray. Find some place that's still showing it in the original format and go watch Guardians of the Galaxy. Bloody brilliant. And it's still my favorite of the year, bar
and he
none.
threw bloody on that, so that means you really need to go.
You've really got to go see it. Yes.
And Josh, what about you?
I like Guardians of the Galaxy a lot. I think it's unfortunately probably not playing in a lot of theaters anymore. But if we're talking about what's available in theaters for people to go see over the holidays, I think Wild is excellent. Reese Witherspoon gives a great performance. I think, we're talking about true stories and adaptations of books and things like that. I think this blows away all the other true story movies that we've talked about today. Mm-hmm. It's a great film. It's definitely one of my favorites this year, and that is out in theaters right now, so that's something that I would recommend. And
I'm going to close out by saying, though I would recommend Nightcrawler, but I don't think it is playing in any theaters anymore, I would really, really drive home that I hope everyone goes and sees Bennett Miller's new film, Foxcatcher, with Steve Carell, Channing Tatum, Mark Ruffalo, me. If you don't know much about the film, you could go back to last week's podcast where me and Michael talked about it. But before I go, I'm going to fanboy out really quick. Josh, what did you feel about Foxcatcher?
I like Foxcatcher. That's something that I would recommend as well. And another true story that is approached in a somewhat unconventional way. I think if there's a problem with Foxcatcher, the problem is that it's almost too unconventional and that it downplays the more sensationalistic and kind of more interesting aspects of the story, but I think it's very well acted, and it has a nice build up, and so I would recommend it. Maybe I didn't like it as much as you did, but I did think it was good.
And of course, I want to thank both of you for giving our listeners a great Christmas present by joining us today. Mr. Josh Bell from Las Vegas Weekly, again for the final time, because I know I want you guys to go read their stuff. It is at Signal Bleed, and you can find all of his stuff at Josh Bell Hates Everything. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime, sir. Michael Smith, you can find all of his work at mikesfilmtalk.com and find him on Twitter at mikesfilmtalk. Michael, thank you again for joining us and being a trooper and being on the podcast for nearly a month straight.
No problem. I've had a good time, mate. Thank you for asking me back.
As my co-writer and / best friend is venturing his way to be a doctor, Michael's been able to pick up his slack. Guys, I wish you the happiest holidays. I thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you guys both will come back and we could talk about our top 10 list, because I think that conversation is going to be real fun. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today, and please continue chasing cinema.